as someone who has transitioned to plant-based back in September of 2019, I definitely had my fair share of moments where my weight ended up fluctuating out of the range that I wanted, and I noticed that certain things contributed to that reason. So if you're someone who has recently transitioned to plant-based, or you've been trying to implement more of a plant-based lifestyle for a while and you find that you're doing more of gaining weight than losing weight, or you're just not losing the weight that you want, in today's video we're going to go over 4 hidden reasons of why that may be. The first one is you're probably eating a lot of things with a high amount of sugar in it. When I first transitioned to plant-based, one thing that I honestly really didn't pay attention to was sugar. And I don't even think I really paid attention to sugar before I went plant-based, mainly because I was never really a sweets person. So if I was eating something and it didn't taste super sweet to me, I never really questioned that I was eating a lot of sugar. And it wasn't until one moment I was eating certain foods and I noticed that my face was breaking out. So if it wasn't really for my face breaking out, I really probably wouldn't have even changed certain things that I eat now. So maybe you've transitioned to having more of plant-based milks or plant-based yogurts or plant-based like ice creams and things. One thing to pay attention to is the amount of sugar in them. Also the ingredients in them of the different types of sugars that could be listed. So one thing that I noticed for myself is when I transitioned to having more plant-based milk, I wasn't paying attention to the amount of sugar that was in my plant-based milk. I would usually get sweetened, and I would also get a vanilla flavored plant-based milk. And then when I would have my smoothies, I'll add the milk into the smoothie. Then I'll also add some type of other sweetener of maple syrup, vanilla extract, and then I started learning about dates, so then I was adding on dates. So one thing to do is really look at the things that you're buying and see if there's multiple different ways of sugar being in the ingredients. One thing that I like to pay attention to is if I'm having something and it has high fructose corn syrup in it, I immediately avoid it. And then when it comes to the ingredients in it, another thing that I do is I look for how many times sugar is worded. So if you have like brown sugar, then you have high fructose corn syrup in it, then you have fructose corn syrup, then you have regular sugar in it, then you have maltose, dextrose, sucrose. If there's a whole bunch of the word with OSE ending at the end of it, one thing I try to do is just look for something else. Another thing is when it comes to buying certain ingredients is that instead of buying like refined sugar, I usually have my own type of natural sweeteners that I stick with. So if I have tea, a lot of what I tend to use is just adding honey to my tea. And if I decide to have coffee, one thing that I'll do is add maple syrup. Now maple syrup I do tend to be more cautious on because it does have a higher percentage, but to me I like it because it's more of a natural flavor rather than refined sugar itself. So one thing to do is pay attention to how much sugar is in the foods that you're getting and look to see how many different words of sugar is in the ingredients label. And then also have your own list of the types of sugars that you plan on having and only have those in your house rather than having so many different types of sugar or using refined sugar. The next one is you're probably eating a high amount of processed vegan food. I'm really a stickler now on just because it's vegan doesn't mean it's healthy. And I think more so I started to ingrain that in my head because I started to see a lot more plant-based options out there. But to me, it didn't seem like they were really healthy plant-based options. It was just something that everyone in the food industry just started sticking on their labels saying it was plant-based because if they see consumers seeing that something is plant-based, that they're automatically going to think is a healthier option. And when you look at the ingredients, it's really not that much of a healthier option. So one thing that I did when I first transitioned to eating predominantly plant-based was I was getting a lot of plant-based meat, and I was also eating things like plant-based ice cream and plant-based cookies. And because I saw plant-based, I automatically was assuming that it was healthy. And what I wasn't paying attention to was the fact that it was still a processed food. So one thing that I highly suggest if you're someone who is eating a lot of processed vegan food is to switch to more of eating real foods instead of eating the processed food. So one thing that I did was transition from eating plant-based meat to then just switching to mushrooms or something like veggie burgers. And when I was craving things like ice cream, instead of buying the ice cream, I would just make my own version using the frozen fruit and my own plant-based milk and having it that way. I think when we think that just because it says plant-based on it, we're automatically assuming that it's a healthier option. But when you look at the ingredients in it, it's really not that much healthier. And one thing that made me start to lean away from eating plant-based meat is the fact that it still was a processed food. It was still created in the lab, and it had a high amount of sodium in it. And for me, if I'm going to do something to benefit my health, I don't want to now affect another part of my health and now have a high sodium intake. So one thing to do is, if you tend to eat a lot of processed vegan food, is to maybe minimize which ones you're getting, or see if there is an option that has more whole foods in it. Another reason why you may be gaining weight on a plant-based diet is you're eating heavy meals right before bed. So this is something that actually contributed to my own weight gain back in 2022, was I was eating a lot of heavy meals right before bed. Like, I would eat heavy meals in bed, and I would eat it right before bed and then go to sleep. And then over the course of some time, I started to notice that like my weight was like creeping up. And at the moment, I didn't put two and two together, because to me, I'm eating plant-based, it's healthy food, it should like go right through me and I should be fine. But what I didn't pay attention to the fact was I was still having food just sit on my stomach and not giving it the time to digest before actually going to bed. So one thing that I ended up doing later on was either having my heavier meals earlier in the day around lunchtime and then having something light at dinner, or if I was having my heavier meals towards the end of the day, I would have that towards around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and then not go to bed until around 10:30. So just so that way I could give my body time to digest the food. So one thing to do is look at what time you tend to go to bed by, look at what time you tend to eat dinner by, what time you want to eat dinner by, and what's the time frame it usually takes for you to make those meals. So that way you know what time you need to start making your food in order for you to still go to sleep at your time that you want. And the last reason why you may be gaining weight is you're eating a lot of refined carbs. I am someone who loves carbs. I love bread, I love pasta, but I do know it's not always the healthiest to eat often. So if you're someone who really enjoys rice and bread, one rule that I actually started before I went plant-based was I stick to the limit of 1 carb a day. So a couple of things to do is either have a rule of only having a limited amount of carbs per day, and another thing, only buy a certain amount of carbs per time when you're going food shopping, and also making your carb more of a smaller side dish rather than making that the main dish. The way that I like to think about it is when you go to a Chinese restaurant and when you eat Chinese food, they tend to give you a lot of rice and a smaller portion of the vegetables, but instead of doing it that way, give yourself a smaller portion of the rice and a larger portion of the vegetables. And for that, you're still able to have that enjoyment from the rice itself, but you're mainly focusing on eating the nutrients from the vegetables, the beans, or any types of greens that you're having. So those are the 4 reasons that I've noticed within my own journey that ended up being why I was gaining weight while still on a plant-based lifestyle, and learning what changes to make as a result from that without feeling like I needed to give up all the foods that I really enjoy. So if you enjoyed this video and if you got value out of this video, definitely think about subscribing if you're not already subscribed. But thank you so much for watching. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video.